Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the NSAI webinar on Dementia-inclusive communities. We're kicking off this morning from 10 o'clock until 12:30. So my name is Elizabeth O'Farrell. I'm the project manager here at NSAI on Dementia-inclusive community standardization. So I'd like to welcome you all from the chairs of the National Committee, Dr. Matteo Zalio and Tom Gray from Trinity House, and our National Committee composed of Pauline Boland, Ruth O'Reilly, PJ White and Helen Kelly. So just to remind everyone that we are recording the webinar this morning for informational purposes, and we will provide a link later on. So in order that you can input your questions and so on, we are going to use our Q&A function using the chat function. So you should be able to check on your tools now in Zoom that you have the option to put comments into chat. Normally we'll have a Q&A function and a chat function, but we will be using the chat function this morning, and the moderators and myself will be monitoring this function throughout the webinar. So I'd like to hand you over now to Tom Gray.
Morning all, and great to have you here. And thanks, Elizabeth. Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Helen Roach Brennan. She's an international dementia advocate. She's a former chair of the European Working Group of People with Dementia and a former chair and current member of the Irish Working Group. Helen is a tireless advocate, and I'd say a human rights champion in this regard. So I'd let Helen tell you her story. You're very welcome, Helen.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to be with you all this morning, and thank you for your kind introduction, Tom. So I suppose let me start with, first of all, for me as a person with the brain disorder of Alzheimer's, what is dementia friends? And what does it mean to me? Well, it started in Japan because they wanted to spread the message and break down stigma. And now it has become, I suppose, has got global prominence. And for me, I've learned over the years that many countries throughout the world cannot use words like dementia or Alzheimer's because of the stigma attached to it. So this is a great initiative for communities to be able to break that stigma. And I suppose also what has happened is that we've got all kinds of different initiatives around the world, like cafes, where people can go and chat. And that has broken down into then ensuring that all kinds of business, the arts buildings, shopping centers, right across the world have become what we call now inclusive. I've spoken, as I said, to many countries, and it's really sad that today we're talking about a human right. We're talking about our right all around the world to be able to speak about our illness and to be included in our communities. It's especially important that we improve our environments. Many of you may have heard me speaking about a ramp. If you have a disability with limited mobility, you have a ramp. Well, I suppose for us, this is our ramp. This is our ramp to ensure that our communities support us, not just our social health, but our physical environment should also be ramped, if you will. So it can remove stigma, and it can, above all else, promote awareness. And at the end of the day, it is about our right. So I would like to quote my friend Kate Swaffer from Dementia Alliance International. So the importance of the concept of dementia-friendly or inclusive communities fits with the needs of our human rights and disability rights to be recognised in the same way as any other person with a disability. We should be supported to remain independent in our communities for as long as possible. So it's not too difficult, and especially here in Ireland, where in small communities in our towns and villages and cities, we know who lives next door to us for the most part. So we need to keep it simple, and we need to have that ramp. And so it's about people with dementia. It's about the communities, the physical and social environment we live in. It's about organizations like businesses and other organizations that they take a dementia inclusive approach. And it's about partnership. And that's important because today is about partnership. It's about you inviting me to the table. And thank you for doing that, because this is really important. So when Claude asked me to talk about this project, it did remind me of the many conversations I've had in Europe. And we asked many times, why us? Why do we have another label? I have Alzheimer's. Believe me, it's enough. I don't need any more labels. But I need to know why, and it took us a long time to understand why. There's no multiple sclerosis, there's no Parkinson's, there's no cancer-friendly community. So we want to know, why are we different? I'm not sure what's really different about me than Mary down the road with AMS or John out the road with Parkinson's. There is no difference. We're all part of a community. And thankfully, Ireland is an inclusive community. And I am sure our place in it is inclusive. We may not be aware. So of course, I'm delighted to take part in the development of the standard. I was particularly delighted to be listened to in such a meaningful way. Too often, the voice of the person with dementia is overshadowed, and other voices and needs of care partners, care spouses, and supporters. And it's important that our voice is there, not somebody speaking for us. I was awfully glad to be able to speak honestly and express my views, and I was very moved by the group's willingness to listen. We had many lively debates, especially around language. I'm really pleased that you understood why words like burden are offensive to people with dementia, and the word supporter is included. Language matters. I live in Tubbercurry, County Sligo. I've always been passionate about the power of community. I have family and friends locally. I tended the roses in my garden. I go to the theatre or whatever show is around, and I enjoy walking in the countryside with my dog. I'm a mother, I'm an aunt, a friend, and as I said, I own a dog, and an active member of my community. My husband, Sean, passed away in December, and it's incredibly difficult without him. But even with the restrictions of COVID-19, my community were there with me throughout, and they still support me today. I was fully integrated into my community the day before I was diagnosed, and I was fully integrated into my community the day I got my diagnosis. I'm the same Helen. My eagerness of my community has not changed, even though my memory has. Yes, some members of the community were not sure how to communicate with me, and Sean reminded them I was still well able to communicate. Now, to tell you the truth, he probably told them she's still talking. She hasn't stopped. So she's still interested in the community, and she still wants to know where the next grant is going to come from. So I realized that social media, finding your tribe, is extremely fashionable these days. And how lucky am I? I have my tribe. As my dementia progresses, I want to live at home, surrounded by that tribe. I do not wish to live in an institution. Dementia villages are becoming very popular. And while I understand their value, I do not want to move to a specially constructed village when I already live in a real one. But I need my village to be dementia inclusive. And so I am a passionate supporter of this project to create meaningful standards of dementia inclusive communities. I want to acknowledge the innovation of this work. It is a new way of working. There are not international standards like this. There is literature, but not standards. This is important because it democratizes the knowledge and makes it more accessible. Scientific literature is not always easy to interpret. Sorry. The standards are also important because of increased awareness. People must be aware of the problems before they can fix them. And this work makes the guidelines implementable. It provides a framework and a toolkit. We must remember that when we speak about community, the built environment is a small part. Education, awareness, and services are all critical. So I'm delighted to see the work of Understand Together in communities to create dementia-inclusive communities. It is my hope that through this work, financial institutions, shops, sports clubs, restaurants and coffee shops, and community groups can all welcome people living with dementia. That people like me and our family and friends can live active, engaged lives and continue to be part of our communities and not shut away. We were part before we were diagnosed, we're still part. COVID-19 has taught us all the importance of connection. We see the value of social connection, and the last minute is not there. People with dementia need connection. Our memories might fade, our words get mixed up, but human connection can still bring great joy to us. Thank you to my fellow committee members who listened so carefully to my voice and sought to include the voice of people living with dementia in the work. It has been interesting to work with all of you as professionals, family carers, and experts. I want to say a particular thank you to Elizabeth, who ensured the work took a thorough approach and engaged with a broad range of stakeholders. I want to thank Tim, Matteo, and Pauline. I think I might have caused Tom a few grey hairs about language, but we got there, Tom, in the end. I'm honoured to open this webinar, and I look forward to hear all the presentations on dementia-inclusive communities. And as I said at the beginning, we are still the same people, and more than that, we are people that have human rights. Under the UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities, it's only about adjustment, and we're only asking for an adjustment. As Nelson Mandela said, to deny people their human rights is to deny them their humanity. This work has the potential to uphold the human rights of all people with dementia, honour their humanity, and give them the quality of life they deserve. So thanks again. Stay safe, all of you. And as I tell people, be kind to each other. Wheeler Beatus.
Helen, thank you so much. That was fantastic, very inspiring. They're my favorite grey hairs, by the way, the new ones that you gave me over the last couple of months. Helen, the way you frame, I suppose, a dementia-inclusive community through human rights, I find inspiring and also gives a very fresh perspective, and also considering dementia as a disability, which is, while again, it brings it back within legal frameworks and so on, it also gives us some practical tools to tackle issues around accessibility and dealing with the issues and the barriers in the environment, rather than the older attitude of that it's a person's impairments and so on. So look, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking part throughout the review of the document. And I know you're here for the rest of the day, so brilliant. And we look forward to hearing from you again in a little while. So Helen, thank you. So that's fantastic. I think we're going to move on to Matteo, who's going to just talk to us a little bit more about the broader agenda for the rest of the day.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much, Helen, for your speech. We really welcome you and your opinion here. So essentially today we're going to have a quite busy morning. So we got the opening address with Dr. Helen Rochford Brennan, and in a few minutes we're going to start with a little introduction about the standard we co-developed with all our people from the panel, and Tom Gray is going to talk about this. Then around 10:30 a.m. We'll have the first session of the presentations moderated by Dr. Pauline Borland and Ruth O'Reilly. So in particular, we'll hear from Donald Murphy talking about the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland and community engagement. Then from Shaban Hanley, who is talking about dementia-inclusive communities from the caregiver perspective. And then finally, we'll hear from Trisha Sullivan about the coalition-led response to building awareness and understanding of dementia and inspiring communities to become dementia-inclusive. Will be followed by a Q&A session, around 5 minutes Q&A for this session 1. And then at 11, we'll move over session number 2 with the moderator, PJ White and Dr. PJ White, and Ruth O'Reilly. And we'll hear from Sarah Bowman talking about why dementia-inclusive communities should matter to all of us. And then Aidan Gilbert will talk about the genesis of a West Limerick memory clinic, meeting a community need. And finally, for session number 2, we'll hear from Dr. Sinead Hines about improving services for people with Alzheimer's disease from the LGBTQ+ community. Followed, we'll have a small Q&A session, and then we'll get into session number 3 with Dr. Helen Kelly and Ruth O'Reilly as moderators. And we'll hear from Lisa Kelly, who is talking about how music and technology can be used by people developing dementia-inclusive communities. Then Trisha Sullivan is going to explain about the education and training needed to support a physiotherapist working in dementia care. Then Carol Rogan, Dr. Carol Rogan is going to talk about an introduction to dementia research network in Ireland, the DRNAI. And Karen Meehan is going to present a talk about Forget-Me-Nots, dementia-inclusive chair. And finally, Kimberly Tully is going to talk about an introduction to engaging dementia. We'll have again a short Q&A session, and we are glad to host our closing remarks. And we have the honor to have the CEO of the National Standard Authority of Ireland, Geraldine Larkin, with us. And then we'll close at around 12:30 our webinar. So we really welcome you, everybody here, and we can start with Tom. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Matteo. And just to say, some lovely comments, Helen, coming in there from the chat, people complimenting what a wonderful opening from you, and a very nice expression there from somebody that thanks for the wonderful feeling that you give people when you speak. So I think that's a great compliment. So certainly, thank you for that. So, okay, so let's move on to this. As Matteo said, look, there's a pretty busy morning ahead of us. So I want to give you a kind of maybe some of the boring stuff in the background, because I want to talk about the actual standard itself. There's this very, obviously not boring, a development of a very exciting and innovative standard that has drawn this group together really, and that has, I suppose, brought the committee together and prompted this conversation. So I'm going to discuss that a little bit, and you know, it kind of informs, I suppose, a lot of the speakers later on in the morning. So as well as giving a bit of a kind of an outline of the standard itself, I just want to give a quick overview of say, some of the background behind it. Some of you are very familiar with this, with the International Standards Organization and so on, but I think it's good to put it all in context. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so the International Organization for Standardization, or the ISO, is an independent non-governmental organization formed in 1946, right? So it's been around for a long time, and it now has the membership of 165 national standards bodies. So a really established and highly reputable organization, and kind of a global leader, I suppose, or one of the global leaders in standardization. So for them, I suppose, to address an issue like this, as Helen pointed out herself, there's not too many kind of international standards in this area, particularly this kind of document, which sets up a kind of a framework. So it's going to underpin a lot of things that come down the line. So I think it's really apt that it would be done at this international level, and we get the consensus from these many countries. The ISO works through a number of technical committees. So there's currently 334 committees, dealing with everything from assistive products to zinc. So absolutely everything across the board. And you know, you'll find them on the website and so on. The committee, the technical committee that is developing this particular standard for dementia-inclusive communities is Technical Committee 314. And it's a more recent of the technical committees, only formed in 2017. So next slide. So this technical committee was formed to develop standards to address societal needs of an aging population and provide guidance to organizations that provide services and products and environments and so on to older people, to all of us essentially as we get older. And the technical committee has a number of international experts and has 30 countries representing various stakeholders. So it is a really comprehensive and well represented committee, given, I suppose, the breadth and depth of the subject matter to hand. So the technical committee is dealing with a number of priority areas at the moment. The first one is around dementia-inclusive communities. That's what we're talking about here today, I guess, and the framework associated with that. But it's also talking about things like aging workforce. It's talking about things like health promotion and preventative care in older age. It's talking about social connectedness. It's talking about communities with multi-generational people, and it's talking about issues around being carer inclusive. So those priority areas are all interlinked, and in fact, the dementia inclusive document we're dealing with deals with all of them in many ways. It was Helen that really brought home the point that a lot of people living with dementia will be working, and they may need some amount of support, but it may be minimal. So all of the issues, all of these priority issues are kind of dealt with in many ways through the standard that we're looking at today and the conversations we're going to be having later on in the morning. So I'll get you to move on to the next slide, please. So the membership of the technical committee, there's 20 participating countries. You'll see Ireland marked up there, but everyone from Australia through to China and Finland, Switzerland, Sweden, Thailand, a huge representation, so a huge interest here. And then there are 17 observing members who are still in contact with the document as it develops, and so on. So as I said, there's a number of priority areas active in the project or active with that technical committee, but there's 3 specific projects they're working on at the moment. Dementia inclusive communities, what we're here to talk about today, the aging societies and guidelines for inclusive workforce, and aging societies, carer inclusive and accommodating organizations. So there are 3 active projects that you could get more information about through Elizabeth and the NSAI. But again, very interlinked with what we're talking about today in terms of the dementia inclusive communities. So I'll get you to move on again. So the document itself has its scope is spelled out here. It's right at the beginning of the document. And it provides a framework for dementia inclusive communities, including principles and considerations of inclusion, quality of life, built environments, special needs group, and stakeholder engagement. It also provides guidance on how to systematically leverage, improve, and interconnect existing assets and structures and transform efficiently into a dementia inclusive community. The scope quite specifically says that it doesn't provide any clinical standards. So it doesn't have any specific medical or clinical guidelines and so on in there. So next slide. So to give you a sense of the document, I'm just going to outline briefly the contents. Look, it's an ISO standard, so there's a particular a framework or approach or format, which is very useful because it's consistent across all of these documents. So it starts with a foreword, an introduction, scope, normative references, terms and definitions. Now you'd imagine as part of a review group that we'd want to get straight into the kind of meat of the stuff around guidance levels and process. But as Helen pointed out, the terms and definitions provided the liveliest area of debate. And we know language is so important, and we know language is critical to how we include people and how we build a more inclusive society. So there was a lot of discussion in terms of our reviewing the document. I'm delighted to say that we were very, I think, contributed a lot of very positive comments in this regard, including introducing some new words such as dementia supporter, which Helen brought to the table and highlighted to us as a very important but subtle term. The document itself then, in terms of its structure, gets into a number of areas like guidance levels, like a process, and I'll talk about these again in a moment. It gets into guiding principles, it gets into the integrated community, and then it starts to pick out a number of action areas. And then it has a number of annexes which look at specific areas within a community like business, infrastructure, and so on. So moving on to the next slide. Thank you. So to look at those 5 kind of key areas that I highlighted in blue there a moment ago, I suppose they're the kind of structure of the document, and then they're the kind of key areas. So the first one is around guidance levels, and this recognizes that communities will have different levels of development and different levels of dementia inclusiveness. So it acknowledges that, and it also provides a kind of a stepped approach towards moving towards, excellence in many ways. So the first level they provide in the framework is almost a kind of a basis. It's saying it's a good inclusive community, but it's only on its journey. Level AA is saying that it's an improved or very good, but still a lot of work to do. And level AAA then is looking at where they've achieved a level of excellence. Still work to do, but have really nailed down a lot of things. So those levels really frame the document as you move through. The second big element that's discussed is process. And this acknowledges that, that a dementia-inclusive community is a complex thing, and you do need a systematic and phased approach to build towards, to build through those levels. So there's a good section in there that provides that kind of systems thinking and process. Then there's a number of guiding principles, and they're kind of high-level aims, goals, or desired outcomes in terms of enabling factors. And then you're talking about the integrated community. And this is acknowledging that, again, you need to start tying all of these things together, and a community needs to take a very holistic, comprehensive and integrated approach that builds in the various kind of legal systems, the social and healthcare, the built environment, transport, and so on. And I guess it starts to really take the guidance levels, the process and the guiding principles, and starts to look at it in a way, how do you fit these pieces together and how do you start drawing out the strands? And then the final section is action areas. And that's where they specifically pull out discrete areas within the community that could be worked on. So this is things like housing, it's things like transport, it's things like the inclusion of children and young people, education, and the health, social and healthcare sectors, and legal systems and so on. So it gives a number of action areas to specifically focus on. Not exhaustive, of course, and recognizes that each community is different and may need to take a slightly different approach. So that's the standard in a very quick kind of snapshot. Its contents and I suppose the kind of structure of it and some of the key elements. So next slide, please. So just quickly to say, what is the status of the standard? Well, we've, as a committee, and a lot of the people are here on the call today who reviewed the document, it's still at a draft stage. So it's with the central ISO technical committee now, with the comments that have been submitted from various countries. But when it's published, it will be a voluntary standard. That's the first thing to say. Work started in 2018 on this particular standard, and there's been a number of meetings and iterations of the draft. The one we've reviewed is pretty stable, and you're starting to see the kind of what the final product might look like. But again, the stage that we reviewed our comments was this commentary stage, which is a critical point for engagements for experts within each country, and this is facilitated by the National Standards Authority of Ireland, of course. So since February 21, the National Standards Committee that was introduced at the beginning, with the help and contribution of many stakeholders, again, many of them on the call today, worked really tirelessly to work our way through this document and come to a consensus. Issues around language, issues around terminology, issues around structures of the document. So we hosted 4 workshops and collated and submitted over 130 detailed comments. I think we were by and large the largest amount of comments submitted by any country. Maybe it's an Irish thing, but I'd like to think it's more of a reflection on our dedication. But they were very thoughtful and very robust comments, and all really strengthened the document. So when the document is published, the hope is that it's adopted in Ireland by various stakeholders, because it does provide a very useful and a very comprehensive framework for looking at dementia-inclusive communities. We know there's fantastic work being done in Ireland in this area through organisations like the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, through Helen and her working group, through Age Friendly Ireland, through the National Dementia Office, through the Dementia Understand Together group. So we know there's wonderful work being done. But this is certainly going to bolster that and give a certain kind of additional international framework. So thank you very much for that. That's a kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the document itself. Again, as I said, we've submitted it for comments and so on. If any of you there today have any queries, you can come back to the NSAI and we can make you aware of the draft and make you aware of developments that are happening. So fantastic. And I'm going to hand on to the next area of our webinar.
Million Tom. Hello everyone, my name is Pauline Boland. I'm an occupational therapist and lecturer with the University of Limerick. So I'm going to be moderating the next session, which should take us through till 11 o'clock. I'm just conscious looking at the hands up that there are 2 people here with hands up, so I might just give you 3 people. Can we hold the questions till the end of the next 3 talks, if that's all right? If you just make a wee note or put a pin in it, and we'll try and have all the questions together at one point, just so we get through as many people as we can, that'd be great. So if we can, the 3 people we're going to hear from in the next 20 minutes or so are Donal Murphy, the Operations Manager and Community Engagement Lead with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, Siobhan Hanley, who's going to talk from a family carer's perspective about dementia-inclusive communities, and Fiona Foley from the National Dementia Office. Each person will speak for about 6 minutes, and when you've had 4 minutes speaking, Ruth will come on screen and be a prompt that it's time to start wrapping up, and we will try and keep to time as best we can so we get to hear from everyone who's on the call. So if you want to go to the next slide there, please, Elizabeth. And just confirm that Donal Murphy is on the call. Donal, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Great.
Right, guys.
You're very welcome, and away you go.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose apologies, first of all, my bandwidth's low, so I'm going to stay off video if that's okay.
Yeah,
so you're probably better off not seeing this.
Yeah.
Probably better off not seeing this face anyway.
So we know it's you anyway. We have evidence now, so you can carry on.
So look, I know I have 6 minutes. I'm going to speak quickly, and there's a lot of slides, so we will run through this quickly. But I want to go back, first of all, to recognise Helen and what Tom have just spoken about. First of all, from Helen's point of view, absolutely about community. This shouldn't be something we have to put loads of work into, okay? Because we've all grown up from communities, and my parents were communities pulled together, basically. So it shouldn't be, and it shouldn't matter whether it's dementia, mental health, anything else. The community should be working together in this. Now, as on top of that, unfortunately, there is work that's required, and that's why I'm really excited, Tom, hearing a little bit about ISO. I have a background in ISO myself, but very excited to hear what's going on there, because unfortunately processes and actions kind of have to be put in place to encourage communities to get to where they need to get to. So what I'm going to very quickly talk about is some of the work we've started to do in ASI, but I want to caveat this by, this is a collegiate effort. So everybody on this call needs to be working together. We're working very closely with Fiona Foley, the HSE National Dementia Office, and the work they're doing with their community champions and their dementia-inclusive community. So this is a very much collegiate effort. But I guess from here, I'm just going to talk about what we have introduced. So about 18 months ago, we looked at putting an overall community engagement strategy in place. COVID has kind of got in the way, so we haven't made the progress we would like, but I'm going to touch on some of the areas we're looking at. Back to Helen's piece again, the words we put in here on our pillars are very similar to what she said. There is an awareness piece, an education piece required for communities, so that they get a better understanding so they can help support. Services, we've touched on some of the services, a number of services have gone virtual now. They need to continue, okay? And finally, I suppose we have a thing around income. Unfortunately, a lot of what's required here will need resource, etc. So we just can't hide away from the requirement, and I keep pushing back to the state here, the requirement that the state need to pull their socks up here with regard to providing funding, etc., for all this work that's doing, okay? So if you want to move on, okay? So again, like I've said, our goals are to work with the community to provide support, public and political awareness, to also work to provide educational opportunities and awareness for people in the community, obviously to look at the whole area of income generation, and then look to put services within communities. Okay, next slide, please. So again, a lot of this language will be very similar to what other people will say. I suppose we're striving around dementia friendly in every community. Again, we're looking at friends of community champions in every community, but a big focus for us is focusing on schools. Okay, so again, it's creating education and awareness through schools, because they are the future generations for this country. Okay, so I'm going to touch on, if you go on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to touch on some of the targets we have for this year. And again, COVID has put slowed some of these up. One is the whole concept of friends of. The next is the piece I'm going to talk about on schools, then about the services that are in communities, which a lot of them are virtual now. And then an exciting development we're putting in place, which is the whole area of a virtual dementia hub. Okay. So if we can move on to what we're doing with schools. Again, I suppose the overriding driving piece with this, someone at my age, I suppose we talk about the stigma around dementia, okay? As we get older, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult for us to change our thought process. So we felt that we target schools, okay? We need to ensure that there's a strong awareness and understanding of dementia in schools. So this is where our whole program that we've put in place. We have a fairly aspirational goal of reaching all schools in Ireland, and we're driving it through the transition year programs in the post-primary schools. If you just want to move on. So we have partnered with a number of different organizations. One is the DSIDC. So we're working with Matthew Gibb and his team on the BRAIN program. We've also worked with Alzheimer's societies throughout Europe with regard to some of the contents they have. We are now started partnering with post-primary schools. And I suppose the exciting thing for the post-primary schools is that this work, the students can then target the GASHCA award. Okay, so if you just want to move on. So I'll talk to you about how this works. Okay, so basically we have post-primary schools as part of their TY program now. A number of them are training up TY students using the BRAIN program. Okay, this enables them then to reach out to other students in their schools or back into primary schools. So the modules we're looking at here are age specific. So from 5 to 7, 8 to 11, 11 to 14, 15 to 18. So really we're using using is the wrong word. We're working with the TY students, okay, to create awareness through the education sector in Ireland. Okay. Next one, please. The next piece then is the whole area of Friends of, which again, we're working with Fiona, and a similar concept to community champions. Again, it's about creating community champions. And I know it's language again that perhaps we shouldn't even have to use, but sometimes we just need to give them direction with regard to that. So we are working on Friends of in every school and in every community. So I see a 6-minute already, so we want to keep going.
So that's title there. If you want to maybe just wrap up with any key points,
absolutely.
Donal, that'd be great.
So again, if you want to keep flicking through the Friends of, like Helen said, it's all the different areas in there. Okay. The other area then, I suppose, that we have done a lot of work on, I know it's not appearing on the slide, is all this community service. So a lot of our services like social clubs, support groups, Alzheimer's cafes, etc. Because of COVID, we haven't been able to do them traditionally, but they are all now virtual. We have virtual cafes, virtual choirs, virtual support groups, and they're going extremely well. Okay, and we aim to continue doing those because it increases our reach. Okay, but also I think in the future it's something that should work in parallel with our traditional community services. The last area we're looking at then is the virtual dementia hub. Okay, so this is an innovative way for people with dementia and their family carers. It's not a website, which can be extremely confusing, but it will be a hub where people can access speakers, clubs, etc. virtually. Okay, so they're the main 3 things we're looking at this year. Okay,
lovely. Thanks so much for that, Donal.
No
I think it's some great examples of the disruption of COVID being such a challenge, but also such an opportunity. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but you've got some great examples there of where the service has really responded and kept reaching out to people. So if people have questions for Donal, I'd invite you to put them in the chat and we'll put them to him at the end after we've gone through the next two speakers, if that's okay. So feel free to pop those in the chat as we go. So moving on, and thanks again, Donal, that was really helpful. Siobhan Hanley is a family care of somebody who lives with dementia. So Siobhan is going without slides, the way all the students would like us to go, no PowerPoint, just talking, telling us about her experiences. So I'm going to just put two questions to Siobhan and get the benefit of your insights. So your husband is living with dementia. Can you tell us what this means for you on a day-to-day basis? So a little bit about at home, but also out and about in your community.
Okay, thanks, Pauline. Michael was diagnosed with vascular dementia at the end of 2013, early 2014. And while I knew things weren't kind of right prior to that he wasn't able to do the things he used to always do, and I'd come home and he'd have something planned to be done that day, and I'd say, why isn't such a thing done? And he'd say, I wasn't able to do it. So I thought this was kind of a cop-out, for the want of a better word, that he just didn't want to be doing things. But it was on talking to some of my colleagues at work and saying what was happening, that one of them said that her mother was a nurse and that this could be Alzheimer's, and no, would I not get him tested? So, which I did. And lo and behold, he had vascular dementia and a brain scan to confirm it. He was also suffering from TIAs, and that explained an awful lot to me as well, because he used to go blank and wouldn't be aware of what I was saying or wouldn't be aware of what was happening in the house. My life changed then to that extent, or both our lives changed, because once we had a diagnosis eventually, as I said, our lives changed to the extent that we were thrown into appointments with his specialist, Dr. Catherine Peters, scans, appointments with old age psychiatry, meetings with the district nurse, the occupational therapist. And this was all new to me, but I very quickly became adept in autonomy on behalf of Michael, because he wasn't able to do the talking, so I had to do the talking. And in hindsight, you asked there about in the community, Mike was never a social butterfly. He was always very quiet, and I was the one that used to do the talking. But in hindsight and looking back, I actually saw that he was very, very clever in the way he dealt with things, to the extent that if we actually met a girl one day and she was telling us that her dad had passed away, and Mike said, isn't that lovely? So I had to jump in there, and he had a bit of a hearing problem as well, so everything was coming together, and I had to explain to her that he had vascular dementia. Blank spaces that would come up in conversation, I would automatically fill in the words. You know, that he had become very adept in doing this and allowing me to actually fall into place. And it is in hindsight that I realized what I was doing. I was allowing him to do it, but I was also filling in so that I wouldn't have awkward silences or embarrassment or whatever. Even though we shouldn't be feeling that, it is something that happens. A personal care plan then had to be put into place, and that was basically to assist Mike in his activities, to keep a safe environment, personal hygiene, his dressing, his mobility, and help with his daily diet. And as time progressed, he was then diagnosed with vascular dementia, and then he was Parkinson's. So that had another bearing on our daily lives as well, because he was dropping things. He wasn't able to lift a cup. He was dropping food. His walk became very, he was shuffling rather than walking, and he wasn't safe to be walking on his own. So again, we had to consult with the occupational therapist, the district nurse, and he got a rollator, which assisted him for quite a while. And he loved going to mass daily. And while he was able to do that, he was going himself. But once things started to become unsafe, I had a an unfortunate accident to the extent that I fell getting out of the shower, and I fractured discs in my back and damaged my shoulders. And I remember I was here at home and I was on very, very strong painkillers. And like a Sunday afternoon after coming in from mess, I lay down and fell asleep. And the next thing I realized, I could hear this crackling noise, and I woke up and there was a guard in the room with me. Michael had got out, for the want of a better word, he'd got out, but he had his keys up until then. He had walked from here to the Crescent Shopping Centre, which would be about a 10-15 minute walk. And the security at the shopping centre, he was dressed in his dressing gown, the belt of his dressing gown trailing along the ground. So security took him in and they contacted the guards. So they got out of him where he lived and they brought him home. And you can imagine my embarrassment, and I lying inside in bed. For all they knew, I was only lying in bed. I wasn't in pain, or I wasn't, you know. So that was a big eye opener for me. And
so Siobhan, in terms of what, from your perspective, a dementia inclusive community would look like, what would your ideal be?
Well, that example there now, as regards Mike walking for 15 minutes, as I said, he was never a social butterfly, so he never really intermingled with the neighbours. And when I came home from work in the evening, I didn't intermingle because I came in and through the housework. What I think is, on that particular case there, would have been numerous neighbours had to see him that day in his dressing gown. Now, he had his pants on and shirt on underneath it, but to me, at this stage, that would have been a flag that there was something wrong. And it would have been lovely if somebody had taken the time to actually stop him, engage him in conversation, bring him home. I have done it a couple of times now that I'm aware of things like that. But I think in a human side, once you'd see somebody in their dressing gown, you'd say, that's not right. You'd go to them and help them. I know that we're kind of afraid in the current climate to approach anybody and whatever, but still I think human nature, and we have to be there to help each other. And as Helen said, we have to be there for each other and be kind. So I think that, and people being more aware. I was delighted there to hear about the transition year students, because in my working days, I used to actually work with transition year students as well. And that is an ideal opportunity, and even younger, to get it into their brains that they have to be on the lookout and be kind to the older generation, and not necessarily older generation, because there's younger people every day being diagnosed with various different types of Alzheimer's. And like, there's so many, again, I was totally unaware of all the various forms of Alzheimer's until it knocked on our door. So
you became the expert.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about community, family is a big part of that too, because I know from my family and Mike's family, I think they were afraid to get involved because they didn't know how to deal with it. And even though I invited them to come to family carers, I must say the family carers were a great backup, and it was through them I've made great friends, and I have moral and physical and every type of support from them and from my friends. So communities basically be more aware of what is going on with people and be kinder in general to people.
Siobhan, thank you so much. That summed up an awful lot, really, really beautifully. And this, we've had a comment in the chat from Carmel saying, thanks so much for sharing your story. I think a lot of people who've had family members with dementia really relate to your story there. So thank you so much for that and your message. So we'll hold on to you in case there's questions for later on. So don't go too far for your cup of tea just yet. But we'll move on to Fiona Foley. To hear a bit about the work that they're doing there. If that's all right. On to the next slide, please, Elizabeth. And Fiona.
Thank you very much, Pauline.
Great. You're very welcome, Fiona.
Thank you very much. And I hope that throughout the presentation, you might see those things that Helen had talked about an inclusive community, what it means to her, but also what Siobhan just mentioned about human nature and about behaviors and why those behaviors, not kindness, is so important. For us, the key is that this campaign is a collaborative campaign. So we work really closely with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, with Healthy Ireland, with Age Friendly Ireland, but with numerous partners on top of that, because not one organization can take a lead on this. It's a collection of all of us together making a difference. So next slide, please. Just to basically show where this fits in, the awareness campaign it's one of the 6 priority areas of the National Dementia Strategy. So it is better awareness and understanding. And the reason why we created the campaign, you can see on the next slides. If you can just go through to those points. And you could just click through the points, please. So we conducted research on the stigma of dementia and how many people would know about dementia. And there was only 1 in 4 believed they had a reasonable understanding of dementia. And also, a lot of people would still have had a fear of the diagnosis. They would not want their families to know. And also most people in society thought that the society should be inclusive, but that it was still excluding people. So based on that, we can go into the next slide. We looked at 2 things for the campaign, is to create a better understanding and awareness. And we did that through a TV campaign and radio campaign where people with dementia were at the heart of this, and they spoke about their own experiences. And that had a huge impact. 2 years after the campaign, we did an analysis and we saw that awareness had gone up by 9% already. But the most important thing is that people said that they were more inclined to support people with dementia in their communities. And that's what we're really harnessing now, is that we want to inspire individuals, businesses, service providers to create an inclusive communities. So how do we do that? So if we can just look at the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. For us, the key really is that we change a culture that we have around dementia. And that is the way we think about dementia, the way we act towards a person with dementia, and the way we interact. And that topic of behaviors that we just heard is really, really key and critical to this, because people will follow other people's behaviors. So if we lead by example, we can inspire others to follow our behaviors. So if we go into the next slide, we can look at what this would look like. So if you think of yourself being one of those little dots in that screen and you support a person with dementia, just like Siobhan just mentioned, reaching out to her husband, bringing him home, and somebody else sees that and sees you communicating, then that inspires others to do something similar. And so one person after another can take actions, and we spread this across Ireland, and we can really change how we think about dementia here in Ireland by doing that, and that we see the person and not the dementia behind it. If we go into the next slide, please. There's 6 actions that people with dementia and their families have said would make a big difference to them. And you can see in these actions, these are actions that make a big difference to all of us, is that we talk about dementia, that we stay in touch with a person, that we're asking how we can help them. And we can support a person to stay connected in their communities and keeping up their hobbies if they so want to do so. They're very simple actions and everybody can take them on. And the next slide, please. And how do we do that? We do that with a national network of partners. So we have over 40 national organizations who are supporting the campaign at this point. And their role is to raise awareness amongst their own organizations. They participate in a lot of dementia awareness training that is at the moment hosted by the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. And they also share our messages out to inspire more people to get involved and to take action. So they would look at their services, they look at their spaces to look at, are they actually accessible for a person with dementia? Do we have to change something around that? And how can we support a person to still, avail of our services as well, but also to stay working, because we have a lot of people with younger onset dementia who can then stay working in their businesses, and how can they be supported around that as well? The other part, in that we can go into the next slide for that, are our community champions that Donal mentioned. And we're working really closely there with a number of champions. So we have over 350 people in local communities, and they range from healthcare professionals to volunteers to members of those national organizations. And they all are looking at ways of how can they raise awareness in their community. So what they have done is they've held networking events. At the moment, they're all through Zoom, so they're hosting dementia-inclusive training events. They might just have put out posters all over the communities to raise awareness for dementia. They might provide a service, so they might have felt a need to start a local support group that might be hosted online at the moment, or an Alzheimer's cafe. So there are different ways of how the champions can get involved. And at the moment, I know Donal mentioned the schools project as well. So what we are doing is we're introducing local champions who might have already been active in schools as well to Donal and the team, so that they can work together and just reach out to as many schools as possible. So if we can go into the next slide, please. So this just gives you some example of what the impact can be. So Irish Rail, for example, had focus groups with people with dementia, and they not only provide training to their staff members, but they also did a walkability audit around Euston Station and are amending their stations accordingly. Also, Crow Park now is has a dementia-inclusive stadium tours. Tipperary this morning actually is hosting an awareness training online for everybody in Tipperary to join. So this is really taking very different steps in communities. And I think the key is that, you know, and I think it's fantastic that we have the ISO standards, or that we will have the ISO standards, but the ISO standards can be a support for our local communities and for our national champions. And it's interesting because we're mapping communities at the moment. So what we are seeing is that they might have very different approaches. Some start with a support group or with a social club. Others start with dementia awareness training. Others start with a business getting involved. And that is all perfect, and that is all great. And what we can then do is learn from one another in our communities, and then start building one little puzzle block to the next, and create all of these different things in one community. So there is no right or wrong approach. Every approach is perfect. Every little action is perfect. It is just about spreading the word of what we are doing. So we can go into the next slide.
Okay, I will ask you to just wrap up there, Fiona. If you've got any takeaway messages, thanks.
Yeah, so the key message there is that we need to share these experiences of what we are doing. So storytelling is really, really important aspect of that. So we need to really let everybody know of what else is happening in the community, so that we can work together and link together. Also, we have a lot of resources on our website. We have a service finder, so you can find a lot of information on the Understand Together website as well. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Fiona. Don't go too far. I'm just going to have a scan through the questions here. I may not get to all of them, but we'll try to put 2 or 3 to Donal and Siobhan and to Fiona. And there's quite a bit of interest in the schools initiative. Bree says she speaks in the adult, and she teaches in the adult and further education sector, and whether there were any initiatives or teaching resources available is her question for that sector. Their students are healthcare assistants of the future.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I suppose I'm looking at the questions here. There's quite a few. I think what would be great is if some of these can be linked up separate to this. Within what we're doing at the moment, it is initially focused on post-primary to just get it up and running, and then we're using post-primary to TY students to go back into their primaries. That's the idea, but certainly we're looking at beyond as well. So if that person wants to get in contact with myself or Fiona, I'm sure we'd only be delighted to speak to them outside of this, because it is about a generation. So if you look at education, it's a vital part for us to get involved in. So if that person wants to get on to me or Fiona separately in here, that would be great.
Okay. And Karen, thank you for putting up the link about the Dementia Services Information Development Centre in St. James's, which is a great resource. I think that was to address somebody's question about physical activity and people with dementia. And I think that's possibly something we'll hear a bit more from Trish when she talks about training for physiotherapists later today. Lots of comments about Siobhan, really appreciate your lovely words. And and such a brilliant example of what an inclusive community could look like. So that awareness and kindness and confidence, I think, to be able to go up to people, you know, take that chance, and it'll probably be worth it. And was the message I took away from you from there. Okay. And Fidelia is asking about care homes for long-term residents and what supports they're given. So that hasn't been covered so much in the sessions today, but there might be some more information about that later on today. Okay. In the interests of keeping going, so we can get a bit in from
Pauline,
everybody.
if I just come in again about linking up with the piece on
Sure.
St. Joseph Shankill, etc.,
Yes.
and the schools there. Certainly, if that link can be put together after this, it would be fantastic.
Well, if that person there who was asking about the schools, because for sure you want people who are doing the same things or similar things to be talking as much as possible. Siobhan, Grant, if you want to email even the NSAI email for the link for today, we can put you in touch with Donal.
Please,
Okay.
Yeah, and also maybe just to say as well, you had the question around physical activities. So we're working very closely with Park Run, for example, and also with the men's sheds. So there are different kind of activities that a person with dementia can be involved if they're interested in that. Because physical activities are really important to stay socially active as well out there and in a safe way.
Yeah, great. And
I
that's
know
a
you're
nice
rushing
example
on,
of
but just-
existing
Yeah, sorry.
communities as well.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Pauline, I know
Donal.
you're going to move on, but I suppose if I was to summarize here, the big thing is I'm involved in this area for about 7 years now, and Fiona and I have worked together, so we know each other quite well. But the big thing is there's an awful lot of great stuff going on all over the country, but we're not sharing it. So I'm not going to put more pressure on Fiona here, but certainly be reaching to Fiona. She'll try and collate that together, get us all working together, collegiate, sharing, etc. And that's why I'm very excited about the ISO piece now, because that will give it more of a structure. But certainly Fiona would be a key person to link in with some of these things. But we need to all work together. Again, it's a community thing, so the communities have to work together, but sharing is going to be key.
I think that's a great message to finish this session with. Thanks a million, Donal. And the point of this webinar really was we learned so much through putting together the standard that we felt it was incumbent on us. We really did have to get people together and share what we were doing and also what we'd heard about other people doing. So that's certainly fitting with the theme here. So I will finish up my bit there and hand over to PJ White, who will be moderating the next session. Thanks so much to the speakers, really interesting and great to get your perspectives.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is PJ White. I'm from the Institute of Technology, Carlow, where I'm a product design lecturer and researcher and supervisor. Specialist in aging, design for aging. I think we can all agree that we had some wonderful presentations so far, and we've got 3 wonderful presentations coming up. Same format, so we're going to have 3 presentations, 6 minutes each, with a 2-minute prompt and 5 minutes questions and answers at the end. So we're going to start with Sarah Bowman, who's going to be talking about why dementia-inclusive communities should matter to all of us. Going to follow that with Aidan Gilbert on the genesis of West Limerick Memory Clinic and the amazing work that the memory clinics do, meeting a community need. I'm going to follow that finally then with Dr. Sinead Hayes. We'll be looking at improving services for people with Alzheimer's disease from LGBTQ+ community. So we're going to move on directly to Sarah.
Hi, thanks very much for having me here today. I have a presentation that I'd like to share with you, and this really speaks to reinforcing the themes that have come up through the other presentations, that if we want a dementia-inclusive community, that we need to look at integration, we need to look at adjustment, we need to look at a kinder built environment, we need to look at a culture of inclusion, and we need to look at those opportunities to build capacity and trust to deliver the right supports. Next slide, please. The work that I do as a public engagement specialist is to ensure that the built environment, the integration of land uses and transportation planning work so that we have an inclusive, livable community. And that means that it works across the lifespan. You can be born into that community and you can die within that community, and that it will work for you across your entire life. This is an example of a beautiful community in Florida, which is inclusive and which is livable and which is working. And it very much differs from what's on the next slide. So this one, if I told you that this was Maui in Hawaii, it might make you surprised because this isn't the image that comes to mind, but it certainly is that location. And the reality is that even though the built environment there is supporting active transportation walking, it has the infrastructure, nobody would want to walk in that environment because it's not, an enjoyable environment. It's hostile. It's uncomfortable. So the reality is it's not just around putting in sort of functional design elements, it's around integrating design into the surrounding context in a way that works. Next slide. Most of the work I do is in the United States. So while I was born in Ireland and lived here as a child, I emigrated. And then in 2014, I moved back to Ireland because my mom was diagnosed with dementia and I wanted to be here. But the projects that I do now here in Ireland and in the United States look at the mistakes that we're often making. So on the left-hand side, this is a community center for older adults. The local community decided to repave that road. And who did they forget? They forgot the user, the primary user of that street. And so these are examples, to go back to Helen's point, when we talk about co-creation and co-design of dementia-inclusive societies, we speak to those for whom it's relevant, people with dementia and their carers and supporters. On the right-hand side here in Ohio, another example of where a utility company came in and decided to drop down placement in the middle of a sidewalk. So you have competing interests, speaking to the last point of a better need for joined up thinking. The next slide, please. This is an example out of Arkansas, but it could be any arterial. And what I want to say is when we ask the question, what does a dementia inclusive community look like? I guarantee it's not this, okay? And so we have arterials all around our country too, but what we know is that only 5% of adults over the age of 55 in the United States will change residencies, and only 2% will change states. So the reality is we have to be looking for opportunities to integrate design to keep people local. The problem here is the signal timing doesn't accommodate this user. Nothing in the built environment does. So when people lose their ability or want to drive, they are now excluded from taking part in routine activities in a safe way. Next slide, please. But we do know our built environment can be therapeutic, and these are beautiful examples of where social prescribing on the right was utilized during palliative care to ensure that somebody who took part and was a part of their community is able to stay involved. And similarly, across our lifespan, as we have different, abilities and different, challenges just involved with aging, that we aren't necessarily kept from the built environment, that it will still work for us. The next slide. I just very quickly want to say that when you see an example of the picture on the left, what we call dual task walking, where people feel relaxed and comfortable and they're having a nice conversation with one another, it's a good metric that the built environment is working for us. So that's what we're after, is, again, just to make sure that people feel able and welcome in their built environment. In the interest of time, I'm just going to skip to the next slide. And again, if you liked bicycling before a diagnosis of dementia, it doesn't mean that you should have to stop bicycling, right? If you felt comfortable walking every day, the built environment should still accommodate that. It's around, encouraging the whole person as opposed to sort of pathologizing their disease and a built environment then supportive of just a disease. The next slide. So very quickly, just to say that, there are examples where we will need more supportive and assisted development and conditions. So this is a beautiful example of Willowview and Meadowview here in Ireland. in which people with an intellectual disability who are aging are supported to sort of live in a home environment for longer and to maximize their skills and abilities through gardening and cooking and other activities of daily living. And so while the goal is integrated community development, we do need to look at those supports that happen later and in life or for specific constituents or, you know, who have kind of multimorbidity or challenges. I know we're at 6 minutes. So what I want to do is just skip to the next slide and say that we have guidelines that address different forms of mobility in everyday life. But the excitement for me about this ISO guidelines is we have the opportunity now to look at our changing cognitive abilities across the lifespan and to ensure that the built environment is working. So currently it's not, you know, as I said, my mom has dementia, but she also has breast cancer. My father has Parkinson's and he also has cancer. And what we realized was Ireland isn't a place to accommodate those complex needs in a responsive and timely way. So even though my mom was born in Ireland and even though I moved home to Ireland, we actually have both of my parents living in France with my sister because the system is more supportive. And that's heartbreaking for me. It's heartbreaking for our entire family. And it's heartbreaking for my mom who would like to be in Ireland. So I do think there's a lot of work to be done and I'll leave it at that. So thanks to everybody who's been involved and I'm looking forward. I won't continue, I'll just end there.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think it was fascinating to see the everyday pictures, and it's just great to understand that like research can be the everyday. It's not an abstract thing. We just have to look out our door every day and see examples, and good examples too. And hopefully us as designers, but everybody should be involved in that design process as well. So thank you so much for a fascinating pictorial overview of your work, and continued best wishes with your great work that you're doing. Thank you very much, Sarah. So next we're moving on to Aidan Gilbert. Aidan is a senior occupational therapist at St. Edith's Community Hospital in Limerick, and the title of presentation is The Genesis of West Limerick Memory Clinic Meeting a Community Need. So over to you, Aidan.
Thanks, PJ, and good morning to everyone, and certainly to all the previous speakers. My name is Aidan Gilbert. I'm an occupational therapist, as PJ alluded to, and I'm based in St. Ida's, we call it down here, Community Hospital. In keeping with the theme of dementia-inclusive communities, I will today recount the origins and the journey of my current place of work, the services offered, and our role in supporting a dementia-inclusive community. Next slide, please, PJ. Context. So following a local community meeting held in 1840, a decision was made to build a workhouse to cater for 550 people, or as referred to in the documents of the time, inmates from a local electoral area. The site chosen was here in Newcastle West, a rural town 34 kilometres south of Limerick City, in the heart of West Limerick. The project was to be named after the local patron saint, Ita. Its mission was to aid the poor in Ireland. Ahead of the times and driven by the local needs, it was timely that 2 years later, the Poor Law Act was passed nationally. And St. Ida's establishment also proved timely in its support for the impacts of the Great Famine of 1847. In 1919, and following the recommendations that the Poor Law Unions should be abolished, St. Ida's was selected for conversion from workhouse to that of county hospital and homes. Things changed again after the publication of the 1970 Health Act, where the Department of Health acquired the running of the facility. Major renovations and alterations took place during this time, and following the 1988 government published report on the elderly titled The Years Ahead, the local health board committed to developing a short-stay rehabilitation unit and day hospital. St. Ida's was now a community hospital. Changes and expansions continue to take place with the ongoing funding support from the Friends of St. Ida's and investment from the HSC. Developments include a dedicated ambulant dementia unit, new purpose-built rehab unit, which opened in 2016. And this week, we're expanding our rehab services by another 10 beds following the reimagining of our original rehab unit. Next slide, please, PJ. So, to the memory clinic. Picture this. I was at the time working in the rehab unit, but also completed standardized cognitive assessments when required for patients attending the weekly medical clinic. The clinic was run by our gerontologist, Dr. Margaret O'Connor. And so one day in early 2011, while I was feeding back to Dr. O'Connor the summary of my assessment and brief intervention with the patient in her waiting room, I, like Marvin in the brilliant children's book by Joseph Theobald, Marvin wanted more, I too wanted more, as did the community. Memory clinics weren't all that new. Elsewhere in the USA, UK, Oz, the concept and reality of memory clinics had been discussed and written about since the 1980s. So a trip to the Big Smoke ensured to attend the first Irish National Memory Clinic, conveniently held at the Guinness Storehouse. By the end of the day, I was convinced that this was what we needed down the country. Now, to the Guinness. After forcing down my complimentary pint in the best pub in Ireland, I happened upon Doctors Anne-Marie Meany and Paul Reynolds, the two Limerick-based psychiatrists involved in care for the elderly. 2 pints in and amenable to my persuasion to join our team, and bang, they're in. Thanks, Arthur. And so, meetings, pathways, holidays, and false starts behind us, and with no additional resources except an interest and intention to develop and deliver an essential service to the people of County Limerick. The summer of 2012 saw Joan Kremen, clinical nurse manager, and myself pre-assessing 8 patients in preparation for our first dedicated memory clinic. The clinic took place on the 13th of August 2012 and thus became one of the first memory clinics outside of Dublin. Joan did all the blood pressure, blood and infection screening, coordination, appointments, logistics. Well, Joan ran the clinic and I engaged the patients in initial interviews, functional and cognitive assessments, information collaboration, and even introduced memory and functional strategies where appropriate, cognizant that the clinic structure didn't support the opportunity for intervention sessions afterwards. The day of the clinic is intense for all involved. The patients are divided into 3 consultants. Joan and I run around painting the picture, so to speak, prior to the consultant reviewing and developing with the MDT an individual plan for moving the patient forward. Patients are either discharged, referred, re-reviewed, or at a later date, or care taken over by the team member's speciality. Amy Murphy, the dementia advisor with Alzheimer's Society Ireland, generally attended all the clinics and was available to meet patients and families there and then, which was a brilliant resource and which will hopefully be offered again by Amy's successor. Amy's moved counties. We also have a local driving assessor with a special interest in reviews for people living with dementia, post-CVA and acquired brain injury. Fantastic resource. Next slide, please, PJ. The change in ownership, the "you diagnose it, you own it" message coming out of the 2019 memory clinic meeting has led our clinic down a new path. Unfortunately, a path that is currently blocked. COVID stopped our clinics and also relieved us of our physical clinic space. However, our journey, like the image my 14-year-old son created of himself guiding his grandfather, who is currently living with dementia and on his own journey, portrays, if we continue, we will get somewhere. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Aidan. A wonderful historical overview of St. Ita. Sorry about the mispronunciation at the start.
You're welcome.
I think it's really important to understand the historical perspective and bring it up to now, and it really links it into the importance of the future of these memory clinics and the fantastic work that you're doing at a local level and national level. So thank you so much for that, and a powerful image at the end as well, created by your son.
Yeah, I suppose that image was taken from a photograph that I'd taken of my father and my son a couple of years ago. And because of COVID, and because that 17,500 kilometers can't be bridged with a gift for birthdays, we've come accustomed with making virtual birthday cards. So that was the birthday card for earlier this month.
it's really lovely, and even as a silhouette in black and white, really tells 1,000 words, isn't it?
And a little bit of a throwback to Winnie the Pooh. I also love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you very much, Aidan.
Thank you, PJ.
So moving along to our next presentation, and our next speaker, Dr. Sinead Hayes from NUI Galway. The title of the presentation is Improving Services for People with Alzheimer's Disease from LGBTQ+ Communities. Over to you, Sinead.
So my name is Sinead Hines. I'm a lecturer in occupational therapy in NUI Galway. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk about a project that we're just starting off. So the title of the project is called Diversifying Dementia Service Delivery in Ireland. And the idea with the project is that we're developing some consensus-based recommendations for the future needs of older LGBTQI+ adults. And this work is done in collaboration with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. So you can put on the next slide, please. So just as a brief background, I know I don't have a lot of time, but some kind of context, I suppose, that aging combined with a history of marginalization and discrimination increases the potential for vulnerability for the older LGBTQI+ adults. So not for everybody, but there is that potential increased vulnerability. Older LGBT adults they're less likely to engage with health services, but at the same time, they're more likely to report poor general health, mental distress, disability, higher rates of loneliness and sleep problems as well. And people tend to have significant worries as well around preparation for aging. So I suppose because of this and some of the personal experiences of members of the PPI advisory panel in the Alzheimer's Society, a need was identified to kind of address some of the gaps that are there in terms of the services that are delivered and available maybe within the Alzheimer's Society that are specific to the LGBT community, and whether that's needed or not as well, I suppose, as part of this. So I put together a funding application with the Dahi, who's on the PPI panel, and we were funded this year to run this project from the Irish Research Council, which is great. So you can go on to the next slide here and talk about the objectives. So there was a report published in 2016, which found that there's a growing awareness of the need to identify the specific issues that our older LGBT people face. And Lorna Rowe and colleagues in 2020 also called on researchers, service planners, amongst others, to address the diversity within healthcare delivery in order to reduce some of the health inequities that have been found in research and practice. To the next slides, please. So the aims of this particular project are to identify the future needs of the older LGBTQI+ people and their care partners living in Ireland face in relation to dementia care service delivery. And the primary objective is to complete an in-depth needs assessment of the care needs. And we're doing this through a consensus process, which I'll briefly outline in the next slide. So there's a number of phases, so I won't go into any great depth around this, but the first step that we're doing at the moment is we're setting up a public and patient involvement steering committee that will steer the project. So we have our first meeting planned actually for the 10th of May. So we have the group kind of almost formed. We're still on trying to recruit older lesbian women. So if there's anybody on the call that would be interested in participating, they can get in touch. The next step then, we are completing a national survey of older LGBTQI people and their care partners. We're going to follow this with some in-depth focus groups. We'll be reviewing best practice internationally kind of throughout the process. And then finally, we'll have a virtual consensus meeting where we'll come up with a prioritized list of needs for this population, and then distributing and writing up the reports and sharing it with the Alzheimer's Society. So the next slide, please. The outcomes then is that we'll have this prioritized list of dementia care needs that are specific to the LGBTQI+ community. Currently, there's no information up there on the Alzheimer's Society website, so part of the work that we're doing would be to address this gap and put some information up there. The results will be used to plan future research and care needs for the LGBTQI+ community and their care partners. And also we're trying to help to increase the diversity seen on the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland PPI contributors. So that's work that we're doing kind of in conjunction with the Alzheimer's Society as well. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I suppose, you know, it's been found that older people in these communities have lower levels of social network size. And we're talking a lot today about community and community connectedness. So this is a particular concern for the LGBT community, older people, where there tends to be a reliance on peer-based support, more so maybe than you would see in kind of the general older adult population. So it's hoped through this project that it'll be possible to develop ways of supporting this population who often face double discrimination, and double invisibility based on age, potentially diagnosis of dementia and sexual orientation as well. So I might just read out a quote actually from Dahi, our PPI member, and he said, "I'd like to spend the end of my life playing some drag queen bingo, and there's nothing wrong with that. I want it in a queer context, aging in a queer context. I want my care to be every bit as queer-centric as my life has been." So if you just go on to the next slide there, please. So this is just if you were interested in being involved. As I said, we're still recruiting a number of people for our PPI panel. We're completing national survey, focus groups, and you can help us just in general to kind of spread the word. My contact details are on the next slide as well, if anybody wants to get in touch. Thanks very much for the time to talk today.
Thank you so much, Sinead. It's a fascinating and much needed study, and the work that you're doing is fantastic for LGBTQI+ older community. And so the double vulnerabilities, as you mentioned, is just such an important thing to address these future needs and future health inequalities. So thank you so much for that. We're just on time at the moment, and we've got some wonderful comments in here on for all our presenters. Well done, excellent presentation, Sinead. Great insight on St. Vitus. Well done, Aidan. Great presentation, Aidan. And Sarah, thank you, Sarah. Great presentation. And the power of visual. So I just so fascinating presentations there. I think I'm just going to ask one very quick question to the group before we move on, because I think you just have one minute left. And if you could just give me a very quick answer, if you possibly can, something that kind of interests me. If we look at improving services, dementia-inclusive services, we often kind of see it as a long game, and we mightn't see it as kind of short-term actions. But what would be short-term actions, short and like everyday, short and small things that we can do to improve dementia-inclusive communities? Just put to the panel.
Timely access to services. From my perspective as a clinician, we don't have enough services to offer the both the assessment, but then the intervention and the support to live fully a life with dementia. So it's something we're working towards. We maybe just need to bring it all together, all the services. There's some fantastic work happening out there.
Connect those services, absolutely. Aidan, I think you could say that about a lot of services as well. I think it's a really great point.
I'd make the same point. I mean, I would love my parents to be able to be here in Ireland with us, but there's an over-reliance on casual and informal caring, and the timeliness for people who have especially compounding issues, it's just not there. And my heart goes out because across the boards, advocacy organizations, non-governmental organizations, families, carers are stepping up hourly, moment by moment. And we need government to invest properly in providing the supports for an aging community, you know, and it blows my mind. It's so disheartening, the lack of investment where it needs to be. So that it's not small, it's not short, but gosh, write to your councillors, write to your elected officials. It is not acceptable.
100%, Sarah. Thank you so
I
much.
would echo the sentiments of the two panelists as well. And I suppose one other, small thing, if you call it a small thing, is kind of going back to what Helen Brennan said this morning about language matters, and just, I suppose, to be always mindful about the language that you're using, even in terms of pronouns, inclusivity, all that kind of thing, from that perspective as well, if you're talking about a small, quick change that you could make.
Absolutely, well said.
Absolutely, Sinead. Thank you so much to all our presenters in that session. So we'll move on to the next session. We've got over to our moderator, Helen Kelly.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
We can?
Yes.
Yep, great, thank you. So my name is Dr. Helen Kelly. I'm a speech and language therapist, and I'm a lecturer at University College Cork. So welcome to session 3. I hope you've enjoyed all the previous presentations. I found them so interesting and very engaging. So our final presentations, we have Lisa Kelly, How Music and Technology Can Be Used by People Developing Dementia-inclusive Communities. Trisha Sullivan will talk to us about education and training to support physiotherapists working in dementia care. Dr. Carol Rogan will speak to us and give us an introduction to the Dementia Research Network in Ireland. Karen Meehan will talk to us about the Forget-Me-Nots Dementia Inclusive Choir. And then finally, Kimberly Tully will speak to us about engaging dementia. And then at the end, we'll have the same format, so about 6 minutes for each talk, and followed by questions and answers at the end. So please feel free to ask any questions or make comments in the chat. Okay, so could we have the next slide, please? Right, so I'd like to welcome Lisa Kelly, who's going to speak to us about how music and technology can be used by people developing dementia-inclusive communities. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Helen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me here today. As Helen said, my name is Lisa Kelly. I'm a PhD student at the University of Limerick, and my research is looking at the feasibility, development and evaluation of online music therapy services for people living with dementia and their family caregivers in the community. But the focus of my presentation today is how we can use music and technology for people that are developing dementia-inclusive communities. So next slide, please. So first of all, you may ask the question, why music? Well, music is cognitively enriching and therapeutic for people living with dementia, scaffolding core functions such as memory, language fluency, and promoting a sense of self. And it's been proven in the literature that engaging in music activities or music therapy can provide cognitive stimulation, encourage reminiscence, promote relaxation and mood regulation, and also reduce social isolation, and therefore promoting social interaction as well. So next slide, please. So using music in our dementia-inclusive communities, well, what does this look like? So in terms of concerts, we want to make sure that they're dementia-friendly and offering supports, as Helen Brennan aptly put it, having that ramp there, and really empowering people, and the sense of empowerment that it brings to someone living with dementia who enjoys music, that they can go and enjoy their concerts in their local community. Also community choirs, not only dementia specific, but also dementia inclusive and perhaps intergenerational as well. and especially when speaking about the work with schools, I think incorporating this could be very useful in terms of music and choirs as well. Also, there are many music activities which offer peer support, such as singing for the brain. And also we are looking at how we can integrate music therapy services into our dementia inclusive communities as well. So moving on to the next slide. So what I really wanted to focus on today is the importance of integrating technology into our work, practice, and dementia inclusive communities. So online dementia cafes have become commonplace over the last year due to COVID-19, and it has really highlighted the advantages of using online platforms as well as in-person services. So some people living with dementia and their caregivers may not be able to avail of or access community services for varying reasons. And some of them may include geographical location, mobility issues, increased cognitive impairment if someone is just too far along their journey with dementia, and perhaps no access to reliable transport as well. We conducted a survey recently of the music and technological preferences of people living with dementia and their family caregivers. I think it was about 93% of respondents had access to Wi-Fi, and you can see from the graph here that there were many devices used at home as well, including mobile phones, laptops, computers, and also other technologies such as Alexa, Google Home, and iPods and iPads as well. So the introduction and hopefully continuation of these online services working in parallel with in-person services can allow people at the later stages of their journey with dementia to still attend or be involved in activities from the comfort and security of their own home as well. So next slide, please. So I'm going to leave you with a short clip from a documentary that I made earlier this year entitled Music, Technology and Dementia. And this was funded by LERO, the Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre for Software, and looking at how we can support people living with dementia using music and technology. And I also spoke to other practitioners and choir directors who offer these services as well. So I don't know if the clip will work for you there. If you could hit play and perhaps go to 1602, if that's okay.
Just not getting any sound.
Oh, that's okay. Well, what I can perhaps do instead to finish off is I can put the link to the documentary movie in the chat function. So if anybody would like to take a look at that and learn about some of the work that is currently ongoing in Ireland, different projects I spoke to, Embrace Music, which is a social enterprise here in Ireland, and also Marion McAvoy, the musical director of the Rising Voices Dementia Choir, and how that has been beneficial for people living with dementia in their community. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. That was really interesting, and it's lovely. I think that you looked at the technology that people are able to use and have access to, as well as thinking about how it can be used to enhance their daily lives. So thank you very much for that. So next we welcome Trisha Sullivan, who is a practice tutor at University College Cork, and she's going to talk to us about education and training to support physiotherapists working in dementia care, which is part of her PhD. Over to you, Trish.
Thank you very much, Helen. You can hear me okay, yeah?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. And thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar today. So just very briefly, what I'm looking at as part of my PhD is trying to develop and deliver and evaluate an educational program that will support physiotherapists working in dementia care. So next slide, please. So again, a lot of you would probably know my supervisory team. I'm very lucky to have huge clinical expertise on this team in the form of Dr. Tony Foley, who was a GP that I worked with clinically, and he's also a lecturer here in UCC, and also Professor Suzanne Timmins, who many of you know is the National Clinical Lead on Dementia, and also my head of discipline, who is Dr. Joseph McVeigh here in UCC. So next slide, please. So from a physiotherapeutic point of view, and from a physical impairment point of view, the consequences for a patient with dementia can be profound, because not only is it associated with physical impairment, but also an impairment in functional ability. And they're two very separate things that we assess individually when a patient comes into us. And physiotherapists can play a key role here in the management of patients with dementia. You know, things like post-fracture rehab, you know, falls risk assessment, maintaining mobility, especially in the earlier stages of diagnosis, maintaining mobility for as long as possible, which is such a key, and it's such an important component for a patient to be able to live independently and to be able to stay at home. From working clinically, and I worked for 13 years clinically, 10 of them in rehabilitation, seeing a lot of patients with dementia before I came into this role the year before last. And as physiotherapists, we have a huge lack of knowledge on how to approach dementia care management. So next slide, please. And again, thanks. So my interest in dementia sparked from my involvement in the Prepared project, which was based here down in UCC, led by one of my supervisors, Dr. Tony Foley. So this was primary care education pathways and research in dementia. And the overall aim of this Prepared project, and I know a lot of you were involved in this project, was to design and deliver and evaluate educational package for allied healthcare professionals. So I worked very closely alongside my speech and language, OT and nursing colleagues, which was great. But out of that, out of that grew another study that myself and Tony worked on together, which was a qualitative study looking at the dementia learning needs of physios and their dementia care experiences. And what we found in this study, which was really, I suppose, grim, was that even though a lot of my colleagues and a lot of the colleagues in these focus groups would have had a high volume of patients with dementia, but they would have received very little, if any, formal undergraduate or postgraduate training. So again, I suppose that formed the basis of this PhD, because I think as a discipline, we have so much more to offer. And I have no qualms in saying that I know a lot of other disciplines are a lot more ahead of us with regard to dementia care and dementia management. So there's definitely a gap in the literature. So next slide, please. So the overall aim of this PhD is to develop and deliver and evaluate an educational intervention to support physios working in dementia care. And I think understanding what constitutes effective education for healthcare professionals is an ongoing challenge across the board. And I think this is probably due to the diversity of knowledge, of abilities and skills and qualities that it takes to become competent in this area. Because again, the needs of a patient with dementia can be quite complex, and trying to understand the motor impairments and the physical impairments and try to, come in with an appropriate treatment intervention can be quite challenging. So next slide, please. So again, I won't go through these, but currently I'm on study 1, which is a scoping review. So really trying to establish the gap in the literature. And this hopefully will guide when I go into study 3, which I'm really looking forward to, which is a qualitative exploration of patients with dementia, their family carers and physiotherapists on what physio should be addressing. So again, getting the patient perspective and the family carers perspective on what we should be addressing and what needs to be prioritized in this educational curriculum. So next slide, please. So currently we're just at the full paper review by just 2 authors. So again, we're just at the data extraction point of view with regard to this paper. And then finally, Great. So we have published our protocol in HRB Open at the moment. So again, we've published our protocol, just scoping, it's a scoping review looking at education and training to support physiotherapists working in dementia care. And what we found so far is there's very little out there solely on physiotherapists. So we are including studies that have been an interprofessional approach in which physiotherapists have been active participants. So next slide, please. And finally, and I think this is what I feel mostly passionate about is, and what drove on this PhD is that working so many years with patients with dementia and just, at times getting almost frustrated because we could give so much more as a discipline. And I ultimately hope that this research and this educational rollout will lead to more expertise through our discipline, and not only in the earlier stages, but across the lifespan of this disease, in middle stages and also in end-of-life care as well. And ultimately, and hopefully, that patients will benefit from this and their family members, that hopefully we'll have more expertise within the discipline of physiotherapy and that patients will ultimately benefit. And from working many, many years in this area, I'm hoping that this will help colleagues and patients alike. So thank you very much.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Trish. Thank you. And it's great to see. I mean, physiotherapists are really important in looking out and looking after people with dementia. And it's great that you're not just on the outside looking in, but that your research is going to include gaining the patient perspective and the family and carers perspective. Of who, what their priorities are, which is fantastic, and it's important and it's essential. So thank you, Trish. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Carol Rogan, and she's going to talk to us about the Dementia Network Ireland.
Thanks very much, Helen, and thanks to the NSAI and the organising committee for the invitation this morning to talk about our research network, Dementia Research Network Ireland. So I'll have the first slide there, please. And the second one. Thank you. So we're an All-Ireland Interdisciplinary Dementia and Neurodegeneration Research Initiative. So we consist of a group of academics, clinicians, government representatives, health and social care practitioners like Trish, who you just heard from there. So we have OTs, physiotherapists, etc. in the network, people living with dementia. So Helen Brennan would be a member of our network, and people living with Parkinson's disease and carers. So quite a broad mix of people in our network. We were established in 2012 and we rebranded with our new name in 2019. And our overall aim is to improve policy and practice in dementia and neurodegeneration through interdisciplinary research and innovation. So we don't actually provide the funding for research that's carried out, but what we do is we facilitate collaborative work within the network, knowledge exchange, capacity building amongst researchers. We advocate for research, etc. We're funded by the Health Research Board and we're hosted by Trinity College Institute of Neuroscience. At the moment we have 118 members, and so we're constantly growing really over the last number of years. We've been growing quite a bit. And we're very much an interdisciplinary network. So we have people from backgrounds such as psychology, nursing. I mentioned some of the allied healthcare professionals earlier. We have clinicians in the area of psychiatry, neurology, geriatrics. We have people working in social work, etc. So a really broad range of disciplines. And I suppose that was one of the aims of setting up the network, was the idea that if you get different disciplines collaborating together along with people with dementia and carers, government representatives, etc., you're more likely to make progress in the area of cause and care and cure for dementia and neurodegeneration. In terms of staffing, it's myself who works 4 days a week as a scientific project manager. And then we have a managing committee of 6 members, a steering committee, an advisory board, and an advocates advisory board. And I mentioned that Helen Brennan would be a member of our advocates advisory board. Sorry, next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of our management committee, and it reflects the different disciplines that are in our network. So our chair is Professor Sean Kennelly, who's a consultant geriatrician. And then we have representatives from the area of physiotherapy, pharmacology, social research, from the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, and health economics as well. Next slide, please. This is a map just to show the various organizations and institutions that we would link in with and have ongoing collaborations with. So it includes the universities around Ireland, various hospitals, organisations such as the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, Parkinson's Association of Ireland, and then basically we have various centres of excellence in neurodegeneration as well. So that just gives you a sense of the various links in there. Next slide, please. So just an example of some of the projects and activities that we get involved in as a network. So we run knowledge exchange events. So for example, we ran in 2020 a webinar series for early career researchers. We run public outreach events. So at the moment we have one running an online webinar series on the topic of brain health, and people can, if they're interested, you can book that through our website on the homepage. We support the National Dementia Office in relation to looking at research topics that we should prioritise nationally, some policy and practice fora, the public outreach events that would be supporting them in terms of better understanding of dementia, and also generally raising the profile of dementia research. Some examples of the policy and practice fora that we've run. So we ran one last November on post-diagnostic support. So that was in collaboration with the National Dementia Office. And then the next one we're running this week, actually, tomorrow, is for the referral of people with dementia to speech and language therapy services. So linking in with a group of speech and language therapists to focus in on that particular topic. We also manage a research projects database where researchers can load up details of the research they're carrying out. So there's good transparency there in terms of what's going on in Ireland in this area. We have a news bulletin which we circulate every second month, and people can subscribe to our website if you're interested in signing up to that. We would carry out relationship building with various national and international organisations. And we also advocate for researchers in the field. So for example, tracking funding coming into the area and making sure that there's sufficient funding there, and then raising the issue if we can see gaps there in funding. And finally, we also have a Researcher in Focus series, which is, it showcases the work of our members. Next slide, please. So just to say, if people want to keep in touch, you may not have heard of our research network before, so you can check out our website, dementianetwork.ie. We're also on Twitter, so DRNI, and you can email us at info@dementianetwork.ie. So thanks very much.
That's great, Carol. Thank you very much. It's great to see what's happening in your network, and thanks for putting up the contact details so that people will be able to contact you. It's very interesting work, and it's really nice to see the collaboration between the different parts of our society, including people living with dementia, because I think sometimes you know, the term "not about us, without us" it covers a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean that organizations actually put that into practice. So it's great to hear about your organization. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Helen.
Okay, so our next speaker is Karen Meehan, and she's going to talk to us about Dementia-inclusive choir, Forget-Me-Nots. Thanks, Karen.
Hi, Helen, and panel and attendees today. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to have a chat with you. I've loved listening to everyone today, and it's been varied, it's been widespread, and I think it's been very thought-provoking as well. We've got the whole subject of dementia from lots of different angles, and there's two angles that I'd like to share with you today. So the first is I'm a founder volunteer with the Forget-Me-Nots choir, And so we've just celebrated our 7-year anniversary. So people ask us about the choir, how easy is it to set us up? It's easy to set up, but keeping it going, that's the hard part. I suppose it's the same for any organization. But when you have amazing volunteers who are all enthusiastic and just see the end goal is that everybody is having fun, they're engaged, and we're learning. So in the past, when we started the choir, first of all, we concentrated very much on old songs from the 40s, 50s, 60s. People knew the words of them, they knew the tunes, and that was kind of an easy enough ask. But years later, with the guidance of our amazing director, Nora Walsh, we're now learning new songs, brand new songs that have been they've just been created for us, composed for us, especially for the Forget-Me-Nots. We're learning new harmonies. And when I say we, I'm totally inclusive there. People who have dementia, people who are caregivers and volunteers and supporters, all learning new songs and new harmonies. So I have a really special piece of news that I can't share with you right now, but all I'd say is watch Twitter and Facebook and follow the Forget-Me-Nots choir. That's forgetmenots.ie, because there is a really interesting thing coming up very soon, and I'm sworn to secrecy on. You'll find out in the next couple of days. So that's what's happening with Forget-Me-Nots choir. So Lewy body dementia. So Lewy body dementia, Lewy body disease, Lewy body disorders, sometimes called LBD. Why is my involvement here? Well, I tell you 2 reasons. One, I met Kevin Quaid. So Kevin Quaid and his wife Helena, who are both, a lot of people know them, they're quite famous in Ireland and also in Europe. Kevin is the vice chair of the European Dementia Working Group. So I met Kevin and Helena just literally a few days before Christmas. Professor Irasima Leroy from Trinity College, she's in GBHI, where I'm a fellow in the Global Brain Health Institute. And she is one of the faculty in the GBHI. She's also working as a clinician in St. James's Hospital. So Irasima had this idea to set up a Lewy body support group to try and raise the profile, because my mother had Alzheimer's disease. That was the initial interest in the Forget-Me-Nots. My sister Orla Horn actually set up the choir, and my other sister Fiona Tierney gives marketing support there. So we 3 sisters are very familiar with Alzheimer's, and up till about September this year, my main interest in dementia was about Alzheimer's because of my mum. So then I joined GBHI and I realized that there's lots of other different dementias. In fact, I've been told there's more than 144 different dementias. Who knew? I didn't. So there's vascular and frontotemporal and Lewy bodies. So why did I get interested in Lewy body dementia? Well, 2 things. One, I met Kevin Quaid. And then a few days later, I watched a film called Robin's Wish, which was about Robin Williams. So Robin Williams had Lewy body disease. He didn't know it. It was only diagnosed at his autopsy. So this film, Robin's Wish, was made a documentary. His wife, Susan Schneider Williams, contacted this Hollywood producer called Tyler Norwood. And she said, can you please get the story out there about what Lewy bodies are? My husband talked about it being a terrorist in my brain. She said, having Lewy bodies is like a bit like whack-a-mole, that no sooner do you get rid of one symptom and another one pops up. And I thought those 2 comments, terrorist in my brain and whack-a-mole, I thought that's easy language for anyone to understand. This is the 2nd most common form of age-related neurodegenerative disease, but it's the one that we almost know nothing about. So just to give you a little idea, those pink stains, they were discovered in the 80s. So Dr. Lewy, that's what the disease is named after. So Dr. Lewy discovered Lewy body disease. Dr. Lewy worked incidentally in a lab in Munich with Dr. Alzheimer and also Dr. Jakob and Dr. Creutzfeldt. The 4 of them were pals. They escaped to America in Nazi Germany. And I'm only just imagining that Alzheimer had more friends because his name is all around the world. And Dr. Lewy, he's still not famous, but that's the task, is to try and make Lewy body dementia a name that is on people's lips. So next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So you can see the pink bit at the top there. These are the figures in the USA and in the UK. It's about 15 to 20% of the population of people who have been diagnosed with dementia have Lewy body disease. So if we extrapolate that and use it for Ireland, we are looking at anywhere between, you can see the figures there, they're quite small, but anywhere between 9,600 people, so almost 10,000 people, and maybe as high as 13,500 people have Lewy body disease. Who are they? We don't know. We don't have a database right now. What are their needs? We don't know, because we don't have a facility for them right now, but that's the challenge. So we're setting up this new charity called Lewy Body Ireland. It's on the island of Ireland, and it includes our colleagues in the north of Ireland. Next slide, please. So what's planned? With a media awareness campaign, we want to raise awareness about LBD through a website, which will be lewybodyireland.org. We'll have a development for an information leaflet, which will go to not just GPs, but also psychiatrists, geriatricians, neurologists, memory clinics for medical and nursing students, and also in voluntary and private nursing homes. In fact, we want a leaflet, and this is where I really need your help today, is to please spread the word about Lewy body disease. It's Lewy body disease develops into Lewy body dementia. It's on the spectrum. So the spectrum also includes PDD, which is Parkinson's disease dementia. Next slide, please. That's our website, which is in development, and it reflects nothing about me without me. There are 5 parts to the website. It includes the people who are affected by Lewy body disease, also the caregivers, researchers, clinicians, and most importantly, it includes a section about the arts, creative, dementia-inclusive creative arts. It's the opposite of leaving you there with a diagnosis, as they say in America, adios, diagnose and adios. But the opposite of that, it's what happens next. So what arts projects can you get involved in? Choir, art classes, dance classes, gardening, anything at all that's creative, anything at all that can help you after you get a diagnosis. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? Next slide, please.
Karen, just to let you know, we've passed the 6 minutes. Do you have any take-home messages that you'd like us to go away with, please?
Yes, just the next slide has the take-home message on it there. Sorry, they're just references. That's there are plenty of books and references on Lewy body disease. That main message there, you can see it in the bottom: hope, support, and knowledge. I can put a reference in the chat box as well. So the information will be eventually on lewybodyireland.org. And thank you so much for this opportunity today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and sorry for having to cut you short, but the slides will be available. And if you wouldn't mind, that would be great, putting that link you mentioned into the chat. That would be great, and everyone can have that as well. Thank you. And our final presentation of the day is Kimberly Tully, and she's going to talk to us about engaging dementia. Thank you, Kimberly, over to you.
Thank you very much, Helen. So yes, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's been a very interesting morning, and I've really enjoyed all of the presenters so far. So today I just wanted to give you a quick overview of engaging dementia and tell you about our international conference this year. Next slide, please. So just a very, very quick overview of engaging dementia. One of the key things that we offer is the SONUS program, which actually has its 30th anniversary this year. So for those of you who don't know the SONUS program, it is a program that basically activates all of the senses, and there's a lot of music involved as well. So it's a very nice program. It focuses on people in a very positive way, so what they can still remember and what they can still do. And this is used in about half of the nursing homes in Ireland. We also are currently facilitating the Dementia Cafe Network project. So we are running workshops on how to set up a cafe. We're looking for black spots in Ireland where there are no cafes to reach out to communities to help them set up new cafes. And we're also doing networking and learning events for current cafes to support them and give them ideas and resources. We're a very small team, so we have trainings that we do as well, but we're always focused on bringing engagement and joy to people. So if that's pretty much our remit. So we do activities trainings, CST workshops, dementia-inclusive gardening. And this year we actually have a series of trainings slash webinars where one series is for people that work in nursing homes, and the other one are for people caring in the home, to give them ideas, activities, and just ideas to spark some joy every day. So all the details about all of these, you can find them on our website. Next slide, please. So the main reason I wanted to talk today is to share with you about our 13th International Dementia Conference this year. So the title is going to be Opportunity Out of Adversity. So we can't ignore the elephant in the room that is COVID, but at the same time, we kind of want to have a positive spin and talk about how maybe this time has led us to be introspective, think about things, and as a lot of the presenters have said, what's lacking in our society right now and in our communities and what we need to focus on in the future. So we're going to hold it the first week of October. We made the decision to have it online this year. We thought about having it blended, but we decided it's just easier to make a decision this year, and the next year we can think about what we can do differently. But it's going to be fully online. That will allow us to have people come in from all parts of Ireland and also internationally. And this year, instead of just having speakers, we want to have a mixture. So we're looking for some people that would like to present. We want obviously still to have presentations, but we also like to have some panel discussions and some interactive sessions to make it more engaging for everybody. Next slide, please, Helen. So one of the panel discussions that we want to hold is about the very important work that this team has been doing. So we want to have Understand Together will lead the session on dementia-inclusive communities. So we would like to have people that feel strongly about speaking and talking and being part of this panel. So obviously we're going to talk about the international standards. We'd also like to look for some good practice examples from national partners, and then some community examples as well, and from healthcare. And then very important, as Helen and others have mentioned today, it's so important to have someone on the panel that is living with dementia, because they're at the heart of all of this, and as they should be. So next slide, please. So anybody interested in being part of this panel discussion, or if you have other ideas about things that might be interesting for the conference this year, please reach out to me. You can also find all the details on our website. And that's all I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly. That's fantastic. And it's great that we've all had to shift really quickly a lot of things online that we would never have really considered before. So the best of luck with the online conference. I'm sure it'll be a great success.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We had some comments coming in. If you don't mind, I'll have a look in the chat. Okay. So for Lisa, an attendee thanked you. Their mother worked briefly in a care home and witnessed firsthand the power of music and how it recalls memories in patients living with dementia. And thank you for adding your link, Lisa, to the chat about the documentary. Carol, there's a question for you. Is there any opportunity for arts and cultural sectors to get involved in the Dementia Research Network?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly, when Karen joined our research network, Karen Meenan there, who you heard from earlier, we had actually met, myself and Karen had met at an arts initiative. It was basically a meeting between, we were called scientists and artists. I mean, it was quite broad groups, but I was there being a scientist and Karen was there being an artist. But yeah, absolutely. If actually, I just sent a message there to Grania. So if she wants to email me and I can have a chat with her. But it's, I suppose, a good example is where you look at GBHI, the Global Brain Health Institute, and where there's quite a number of people from the arts, involved in that organization. And you can see how what interesting collaborations and innovations can come out from that. So we're always open to broadening the net. So yeah, absolutely. If someone wants to get in contact, and we can have a chat about that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Kimberly, there's actually lots of lovely comments about everybody. People really enjoying all your presentations. Kimberly, Sinead, I see you've just responded. Sinead mentioned that she might like to link about the potential for rainbow cafes. So,
yeah, I love the idea.
Great. And you're contacting each other there. I see your contact details in the chat, so that's fantastic. Just generally, Trish, just a quick question. I literally have a minute. I'm just your education of physiotherapists is very interesting, and I'm just wondering that some of the previous speakers have spoken about education at school level. Have you, and sorry to put you on the spot, but have you any ideas for what you've had to look at to see how all healthcare professionals can be better trained and supported so that they can go on and then support people with dementia?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Helen. We're looking at different kind of frameworks to guide us here, because it's really, really hard, even when I was doing my search strategy, even defining what an educational intervention is. But we're very much guided by, we're going to use Kirkpatrick's framework that looks at not only the reaction of the participants. So for example, we all come off this, the initial reaction, okay, what do we take from it? Okay, we learned this, that, and the other, but then we go on to learning. And then does that learning change our behavior? So if I go on an education intervention, does it actually change my clinical practice? So when I go back to see my patients, can I take something that will change the way I treat dementia patients? And then the final one then is results. And this is a really hard one to capture. So is my change in behavior, has that had a knock-on effect on the patients? So have the patients improved because I know more? And you'd hope that the treatment does. So it's used a lot in educational curriculums, this Kirkpatrick framework. So that's what I'm going to follow. But I'm hoping to get to even the behavior stage of it to see, do physios, once they have this educational intervention, what they'll do. It will be what's coming from the physios. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the patients and the family say, family members, but is kind of interactive workshops, case-based discussions, very real patients, case scenarios, that kind of learning around that and blended would be probably a hybrid model probably as well. So that's what's coming for.
Thank you, Trish. Thanks very much. And then one final comment, Karen, you're getting lots of positive responses, and people can't wait to hear the news. So we're going to be keeping our eye out on social media to see what the exciting news is. Okay, thank you everybody who spoke at session 3. Thank you.
So thank you everybody again. Thank you, Helen. Thank you for all the speakers. And now I'm very happy to introduce the CEO of the National Standard Authority of Ireland, Geraldine Larkin. So Geraldine Larkin has been at the helm of the NSAI, the National Standard Authority of Ireland, since March 2017, where she led the organization in serving both the business and citizen alike across a range of products and services. So we are really glad and we're really happy to have Geraldine Larkin with us, and please welcome her, and let's hear her presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matteo, and it's really, really wonderful to be here at the end of your webinar, and I suppose I feel very inadequate having listened to all you've talked about over the past couple of hours. There's no standard that can capture, or nothing that I can say indeed can capture just the breadth and the diversity of, my goodness, all the work that's ongoing. But for me, I suppose the key point in the work that you're doing, and the trigger that started from the standard is really seeing the standard come to life, seeing it in action. And I suppose at this point, I want to particularly thank Matteo, you and Tom, for the work you've done in taking the working group forward and giving it this life. And indeed, special thanks as well to my own colleague Elizabeth O'Farrell, who I know was instrumental behind the scenes in making this happen. Because internationally, one of the core ideas of the International Standards Organization for 2030, looking out that far, is that everybody's voice gets heard. And this is typically spoke of and thought of in terms of standards that it set up, new products or new tech, or indeed how new quality systems work. But there's a huge breadth of importance in the areas that you're working in making sure that all voices are heard, because of the diversity of what you're doing, but even more importantly, because your views are shaping the future. The great thing about standards, and I know it's been referenced once or twice this morning, is that it sets a framework, and that framework, and particularly in the case of this standard, because of the broad action areas, it sets out a path and a map almost of where we go next. And in the standards community, we're continuously iterating what we do. So this is really just the start of the work. It has allowed and brought together references to other areas that are connected that I hope are of use. But also what I see happening internationally is that this over time will build, it will expand, it will create, it will go on, and it will have its own life. And I would hope that by having that life, that it will propel and support the work that you're doing. And I know there was mention made of cultural changes. And again, I would hope that with the way that the standard has been structured and with the input that you've managed to put into this and your shape and influence into that work, that we'll be really able to directly impact upon the thinking and culture and acceptance of broad-based communities. And I think for that reason, the 8 action areas are absolutely critical to ensure that this is placed in the context of integrated communities who need to be more inclusive. And the standard starts out by setting out the ways that public bodies, communities, everybody that you've talked about this morning, all the broad base of stakeholders can integrate and engage with it. And I would hope that it would also challenge people to be outside the box and constantly be reminded that this core concept of all voices being heard is absolutely essential going forward, so that we can make sure that people who are living with dementia can feel supported and safe in their communities, no matter what. So, as I said at the start, there's nothing I can say that really adequately captures the extent of, my goodness, the work that you're all doing. I want to pay tribute to the legacy that your input has created and allowed us in the National Standards Authority to influence and impact on the international stage in the area of living with dementia. We've created, or you have created, a legacy for future generations. And I hope that your experience with this and the momentum that you've gained and taken from this standard encourages you to stay connected with our standards process. There are likely to be more actions, more iterations, and I would hope that we will continue to hear all your voices throughout that piece, and that going forward, this can only get stronger. And I would hope that from our perspective within the NSAI, in serving the Irish community, that we will do everything in our power to make sure that that communication channel is open, is accessible, that we do it in a way that reflects your needs, that we can continue to do it on a virtual basis, and that we're inclusive. So I look forward to where this journey will take us. I think this is the start of the standards journey. You've already created a legacy, and I'm looking to the future as to the next steps in this. So thank you to everybody, to my colleagues in the NSAI, to Tom and Matteo for steering this, but most particularly for all of you who have engaged and given your views and really made this a living and very, very real standard. So thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. So Geraldine, thank you so much for those great words. Thank you so much for the NSAI for all the support to Elizabeth. I think her tireless and committed work to this, and her stick and carrot approach equal, big stick. So she's been fabulous. To thank all the attendees, we had a fantastic turnout today. To thank all the presenters, but really to, I suppose, especially to thank Helen Rochford-Brennan and, you know, Siobhan Hanley, people that are kind of living with this on a day-to-day basis. You know, I suppose this is what it's all about, putting people that are living with dementia at the center of this. So thank you for everyone, and we're looking forward to continuing this really exciting journey.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody. I can just echo Tom. A really big thank from me to Elizabeth, to NSAI, and of course to all the panelists of the speakers today, and the people who really help us to really bring the development of the standards to everybody. Really, we are democratizing the way to create standards. And if it wasn't for all of you, today we wouldn't be here talking about this important issue. And thank you so much for it to everybody. Thank you.
Tom, Helen has her hand raised. Do you want to speak, Helen?
I think I wrote it a bit, probably the wrong letters, but I'm not very good, as you all know. At when you have Alzheimer's, you kind of do two things together. So I was listening. I just wanted to say again, Elizabeth, to you, to Tom, to Matteo, to Pauline, thank you so much for doing this work for me and for people like me. It's so important. I am so excited, and that it's something that's going to be international, and I wish you all the very best. And Geraldine, you have a great team. Thanks for allowing me to be part of today. I want you to know, on behalf of the Irish Dementia Working Group, and I'm sure I could say the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, we're very grateful to have our voices heard, and don't be afraid to reach out to us. We want to help you to have better communities, to have more inclusive communities. That's why I advocate. That's what I want my legacy to be, that I've done everything I can for as long as I can to ensure that all of you have a great place to live in, a community that everybody with dementia is happy and living happily in. And above all else, when we're diagnosed, your friend, your colleague, will you make sure that they continue? I just want to say, when John wants to go for his pint of Guinness, or Mary wants to go play bingo, or they want to play golf or tennis or whatever, support them from the beginning. You know, it's important to remember that a lot of the people that's going to be diagnosed tomorrow are colleagues, because we're diagnosed younger, and that's important to keep them in the community. And then we won't have to worry. As a friend of mine at the World Health Organization said, Helen, we don't want to be talking about inclusive communities in the future, because we want it to be the norm. So I wanted to be the norm. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Helen. I don't think we could end on a better note than that, and also more finishing a couple of minutes ahead of time. So I think we can probably wrap up, and thank everyone again. I know there's been a lot of thank yous. It's been a fantastic morning, and we look forward to talking to you all very soon, and enjoy the rest of your day. So all the best now.